birth families. Additionally, Matt has assisted many startup companies and has served on the board of directors of numerous companies as well. Matt, we'll turn it over to you.
I was just getting comfortable. Thank you, Meredith. I am going to kill myself. I like to wander, and there's a cord right here. So, if I trip and fall, please laugh, because it will be funny. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Again, thank you, Meredith. So, my name is Matt Warner. I am an attorney. I love adoptions, and so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. There's nothing better than doing adoptions. So often when you go into the court, you see the judge, and he's like, When you do adoptions, the judge is smiling. It is the greatest thing in the world to see happy judges. And not all adoptions are happy, but so many of them are. I'm an adoptive father of 3 kids. So, having 3 children, if you want to interrupt me at any time, I am used to it. Go ahead, ask any questions as we go along. It'll make it more enjoyable for all of us as we go through. Today, I will focus on infant adoptions. I'm not going to get into adult adoptions. We're not even going to really hit the step-parent adoptions today. Thought that we'll talk about the infants and the younger children and go from there. So, to start off, how many in your firms do adoptions? All right, we've got Meredith. Meredith is awesome. So she works and helps me out all the time, make sure that I keep things straight. So any of you that if you have any insights or anything you'd like to add, don't hesitate to jump in and move forward. All right, because just being law, we've got to put statutes up because nothing makes law more fun than reading a bunch of statutes. But we'll make them interesting because the first thing we're going to talk about is sex first thing in the morning. I'm sorry, this is not the Me Too movement, but this is what happens. So part of starting off with adoptions, I also teach a class. I teach a class at UVU, and we did sexual harassment last week at 8:30 in the morning too. So this is my life. All right. So the first thing we have to look at with adoptions is, just like anything in the law, you have to provide notice, okay? This notice goes to birth fathers, birth mothers, who is on notice that a child can be placed for adoption. Well, Utah, under 78B 6110, the fact that inside the state of Utah, if a couple, and non-married, now that's important, a couple that is not married, if they have sexual relationships, the man or the other person is put on notice that the woman could place that child for adoption. Okay? So that's the base that we start off with. And that notice, you don't need to send them papers, you don't need to flag, they don't need to act, right before consensual intercourse, she does not need to say, by the way, if I get pregnant, I can place this child for adoption. No, it's already built into the law. A lot of times we'll hear that Utah is so unfair to birth fathers. What's interesting about this is there are other states that have this similar notice. We just don't hear about it as often because there are more adoptions done in Utah probably than most other states. It's a much higher percentage. Okay, so when do you need to give notice to a birth father? Okay, so 110.1, pre-birth notice to presumed father of intent to place an adoption. Okay, you can give notice. If you want to let them know that this child is going to be placed for adoption, 110.1 gives you the opportunity to give them notice, let them know that, hey, this child is going to be placed for adoption. So as an adoptive father, we have contact with 2 of our children's birth fathers. We have great relationships with them. And they knew about the adoption from the beginning. One thing in our firm, and this is not all firms, we like to talk to the birth fathers ahead of time, as often as we can. and give them notice. Let them know and let them have peace of mind ahead of the time, because then we find that we don't have that problem down the road. As far as all the adoptions I've done, when I've had the opportunity to sit down with a birth father and say, okay, look, here's your options. You had relationships with X person. It doesn't look like you're going to get married. It doesn't look like you're going to live together. Any of that. I said, you can make a choice now that this adopted couple can let the child know in the future that you made a choice on your own to let this child live in a family, and you won't have to pay child support. And if you meet the couple, there is an opportunity to always have some sort of relationship with them. And oftentimes we find that by discussing the options that they see that usually works out fine. So, okay. Again, if anyone has any questions, if I just kind of glance over something, don't hesitate. All right, so 110.5. This is where we get into some of the interesting issues that we see here in Utah about notice, okay? This is what happens. What happens when you have an out-of-state birth mother, an out-of-state birth father, and let me tell you, I'll tell you a little situation we had. It's been a few years. We had a birth father actually contact us, and I don't represent a lot of birth fathers, but when the situation's right, we absolutely do. This is what happened. Is he was a stand-up comedian, and him and his girlfriend, the girlfriend was still married. So that give you all the background. But they started in Florida, so they went to Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and back around, and they had relationships in each one of these states. And she got pregnant, flew to Utah, because there's a few agencies that do this. She flew to Utah, gave birth, placed the child for adoption, and then flew back home. I think she was from Florida. He didn't find out about it because he had been talking to her this whole time, and he wasn't put on notice that she would ever come to Utah to place a child for adoption. Now me, I am very pro-adoption. I love adoption. But to me, I thought, this is unfair. How would somebody having relations in Florida, they should never have to file anything in Utah, all the way across the country, to protect their parental rights. So, the state of Utah, from situations similar to that, they've improved their notice.
Just a question.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I get the story right. Were they in communication all the time when she was pregnant? So he knew
Yes.
she was pregnant.
He knew. But she had no, so she...
But he just didn't know that she wanted to get the child up.
Correct.
For abortion. That was the only thing.
Adoption, not abortion.
Yes, that's.
Much different situations.
So that's the only thing that he didn't know about. He knew the baby was coming.
Yeah. And so situations like that were, and that became a very complicated situation. Because, sidetrack on that story, because she was married, her current husband is actually the presumed father.
So was there a paternity question there? Did he have to?
No, the saddest part about it is they ran out of money to continue fighting it, and it was just impossible to continue. But it was, that's what what we were looking at doing is we were trying to stop the adoption. And I felt horrible because I know exactly what that adopted couple's going through. But those are the kind of things that, for me, as an adoptive father and as an adoption attorney, I want to see good adoptions. I don't like to see these under the rug ones, because that gives all adoptions a bad name in the long run. So what the legislatures did is in 110.5 is they came out and said, hey, okay, we need to start giving notice to these out-of-state birth fathers. We can't expect people in New York, Florida, to have to, every time they have sexual relations, to file a paternity action in the state of Utah. It makes no sense. So that's what they've come, and it sounds really good, but there's still a lot of wiggle room in 110.5. They're getting there. It's not a perfect statute, but they are changing it where you do need to give them the 30-day notice and start to utilize the law where conception occurred. In my other case, it was really hard to figure out where conception occurred because they didn't know which of 5 states conception actually occurred as they were on their little adventure. So that's notice. The easiest ones are always when you have in-state birth mom, in-state birth father, couples here in Utah. Those are kind of the easy things to handle there. So, all right, any questions on notice? All right. Okay. Oh, yes.
I have one question, and that is that, so if she was married and her husband was the presumed father, and this other man was the actual biological father, she came here knowing that she wouldn't have to give him notice.
That's why she came to Utah, is because she signed a waiver to apply to consent to Utah law.
Yeah, and she did that because she knew that our state considered sex to be notice.
Correct.
These new morals are really something else.
And that's part of the reason that they're changing the law. They've now applied a residency requirement of 90 days. But the thing is the residency can also apply to just the adopted couple and not the birth mom. So there's a few. It's still a really. I think Utah has a really positive adoption statute. There are a few things that people take advantage of that need to be tweaked. So overall, it's a great statute and very positive. Those kind of little things, yeah, they probably do need to be modified. Yeah.
What if the birth mother comes to Utah and says she doesn't know who the father is?
Then you're looking at a general notice. So what you have to do is, let me start with a birth mother in Utah, because we still have that happen too. So a birth mother in Utah says, I don't know who the birth father was, it was a long weekend. You laugh, you see these occasionally. So what you would do is, hopefully she can give you some sort of information. It's interesting, is actually with my youngest son's birth mother, she thinks that a kid named JD is the birth father. We've actually reached out to him. He says no. But she says, well, it could be somebody else. Those then in Utah it's really easy. You just say so-and-so, or, we do a paternity, and I'll talk about paternity searches in a little bit. Out of state, you do the same thing with any notice. You basically, in a nutshell, you put out anybody that's had relationships with so-and-so on roughly such and such date, you're put on notice that she is thinking of placing the child for adoption.
So she doesn't give you any information?
She has to give you some, and they usually do. I've never had any of them that blatantly refuse to. Occasionally on abuse situations and that, when that's the situation, you go to the court ahead of time and just say, hey, look, here's why we're not going to provide actual notice. There's history of abuse here. Any notice could escalate this, and we put that in the judge's hands to decide if we need to provide notice or if we can forego that part of it. So, very similar to other family law.
Do they normally just say, the judges say in those situations that you don't have to provide notice?
No, you have to, judges are really, they're really positive about that. They want to make sure that it's not underhanded. They want to make sure it's ready to go. So they'll work with you. They want the facts, just like any case.
Right.
They want you to provide hey, here's the situation, you know. You provide the police report, you provide the other things to prove there was actual abuse. So
I see.
it's not, and those are not the easiest situations for a birth mother to go through.
Right.
But it's, you know, we're looking out for their interests and protecting them. So. Okay, so consent. I know 12-year-olds are not infants, although sometimes they act like it. My 11-year-old, there's days. Okay, so consent. Who needs to consent to an adoption? For any child over the age of 12 and older, they actually need to consent. Say, yes, I am willing to be adopted by so-and-so, okay? Anybody who is a recognized parent needs to consent to the adoption. All right, so that is the birth mother. And then the presumed father needs to consent if even though he was put on notice, he doesn't, so he has to take, and I'll talk more about what a birth father actually has to do in order to be able to consent. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a minute. And then if there is an agency involved, then the agency actually has to give consent to the adoption.
What if the parents' parental rights have already been terminated and someone else has adopted the child? Do they still have to give permission?
Yeah, let me answer that in two ways. So like in a foster care situation, if parental rights have already been terminated, the state of Utah will give consent. They step in at that point. If the child has already been adopted, and then somebody's placing that child for adoption, wow.
Yeah. My friend just adopted siblings because the grandmother adopted them, decided she was too old to care for them.
Oh, okay, perfect situation.
So put them up and my friend adopted both of them.
Yeah, so in that situation, grandmother who had parental rights at that time would have consented along the way when she terminated her parental rights.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very open. They just went to a family reunion with the grandmother's side in Florida with the kids, so.
Yeah, so that's how, because once parental rights are established, it's just like a paternity action, any of those things, and we know who the parents are, and so that's where they're the ones that need consent at that point. Okay, now this becomes a little bit interesting here. So in the state of Utah, okay, who can take a consent or a relinquishment? Okay, so a relinquishment. Talk about that right after, but a relinquishment, that is where the birth mother, birth father actually relinquishes their parental rights, just like what was mentioned with the grandmother. They voluntarily sign. So, in the state of Utah, under 124, it says that a district court judge, well actually the law says that any judge who has jurisdiction over adoptions, which would be any district court judge, can take a relinquishment. Anybody appointed by the judge can take a relinquishment, or a licensed adoption agency, or DCFS is also kind of like an agency. They can all take relinquishments, okay? So, how many of you practice here in Salt Lake? Okay. Bless their hearts here in Salt Lake. I don't know, there's a group of district court judges. Generally what we do is, and I'll get into this in a minute, but we actually file the petition ahead of the birth, and we ask the judge to appoint a social worker to take the relinquishment. Because social workers, they have experience in dealing with emotions and all of these things that are happening. Well, there's a group of judges here that are like, no, we want you to bring that birth mother in to our nice and cozy, so warm courtroom, because there's not a better place in the world to feel comfortable. And we're going to put her on the stand and ask her all these hard questions to make sure that she really wants to place a child for adoption. I really dislike taking birth mothers into the court. We do it. When we do it, we do try to get a caseworker on hand to be there kind of as their advocate. Because attorneys and judges were not always the most emotionally connected people in the world. And trying to go through it is a very difficult decision most of these women are in. And so having somebody that they can talk to and walk them through and help them understand what emotions they're going through is very, very positive and beneficial. So as often as we can, we try to get them connected with a social worker so that they have another advocate on their side.
So how does relinquishment work with the safe harbor of a baby that's been abandoned?
So it's different, that's a whole different statute. It just, at that moment, by dropping the child off at a hospital, that they don't know who the birth mother is at that point. And as long as they have, done everything proper, then there's not gonna be any action against that person. So, at that point, they don't know who the birth mother is to terminate any rights, so just by the safe harbor rule, the parental rights are already terminated.
So the child becomes a ward of the state.
Correct. And then they have all their policies that way that they handle from there. Good question. Okay, so a birth father, or a presumed birth father. So just a regular notary can go ahead and witness a relinquishment for a birth father. They don't need to go in front of a judge, they don't need any of that. And some of that really goes back to, hey, we already provided them notice when they had sex, so they've had 9 months to think about this. Someday I'm gonna go to high school and start doing trainings in high school and just look at all these men and say, okay, prom's coming up. I want you all to know that you're gonna be on notice. So, and they wouldn't have a clue what I'm talking about. The bad thing is my poor kids, they hear this all the time.
What's really sad,
They are.
what's really sad is when you're the notary that takes them.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. When somebody contacts you and says, hey, my son needs to sign a document before a notary, and you arrive and you ask for their driver's license and you get their identification and you put it in your book, and then all of a sudden you're presented with this document. I mean, that's a really serious thing.
It is, and that's why I like to sit down and spend time with them and let them help them understand what they are signing. Because I don't like that situation. I don't like when somebody doesn't understand, because I'm a proponent of positive adoptions. In the adoption world, my wife and I actually do a lot of presentations for adopted couples also. So you've heard of openness. Well, when it comes to openness, my family, we're clear over here as far as open. Like, we have birth mothers stay at our house. My oldest son, his birth mother's getting married in a month. We're flying to Mississippi to be there. It's just the way but, so that's the kind of stuff. We actually just went camping with my oldest son's birth father. We explain these kind of concepts that are out there, those things of the past where, a child sits down at 13 and finds out that they're adopted. That kind of whole thing isn't as common anymore. Likewise, it's much more common that people know who their birth family are. So it really becomes a more positive experience for in the whole gamut of it. So. Okay, so relinquishments. When can you take a relinquishment? Okay, in Utah, the soonest you can take a relinquishment is 24 hours after the birth of the child. Okay? Other states, Texas is 72, California I think is also 72, Arizona 48. Every state has a different time frame on how soon can a relinquishment take place, okay? So, this is where it becomes very beneficial to have a social worker. So if the birth mother is very adamant that, hey, this is my plan, I want to place this child for adoption, having a social worker, they can actually take care of all of that inside of the hospital, or as soon as the birth mother is discharged from the hospital. Those kind of that relinquishment can take place. Whereas if you're going to do it in front of the judge, you actually have to find the time to get there in front of the judge. Different situations occur. If you're handling everything, you just file a notice for hearing. Most judges are happy to just, like during their lunch hour or whatever, if you set it up with the clerk, they'll work with you to get the birth mother in to do that relinquishment. They won't make you put it on a hearing for 2 weeks later. You can actually usually do that within probably 24 to 72 hours to get them in. Okay. A birth father at any time, you can actually, they can sign the relinquishment in front of the notary. Okay. So you can actually, it's one of those things, I've seen it all ways. I've seen it where they do it at the same time as the birth mother. I've seen it where they do it separate or after the birth, before the birth. It really depends on, as they make that decision, what's going to work for them too. Okay, counseling. Part of the Utah law, and the sad thing about this one too, this can be waived. Okay, the law states that a birth mother, that the adoptive couple is required to pay up to 3 counseling sessions, this is post-birth, of 50 minutes each, okay? And that's with a licensed caseworker or whatnot. And then in the law too, it actually gives, up to $400 or a reasonable amount. But the birth mother can waive that. What you see in many relinquishments, and we're as guilty as anybody, that we actually put in the relinquishment, in the consent, that the birth mother waives that right to counseling. But then the reason we do that, most of the couples will still offer it. It just allows the adopted couple to abide by that law of it being waived, and then they can still do the counseling sessions as needed apart from that. Okay, so back to our presumptive father who was put on notice in the greatest night of his life. He was put on notice in order for him to maintain his rights. He has to, under section 121, he has to do a few things, okay? In other states, all of this can be done after the birth or after the birth mother signs. In Utah, as soon as the birth mother signs her relinquishment, birth father's rights, unless he's done these things, are automatically terminated. Okay? He can't come back and say, oh, I didn't know. The judge will say, and there's a lot of court cases about this, the judge will say, did you have sex in Utah? And they say yes. They're like, you knew. Okay. It'd be a fun commercial. All right. So the first thing they need to do is they need to file a paternity action. Well, actually, sorry. Actually, the first thing they need to do is sign the birth father registry. Okay, that has to be done with the Office of Vital Statistics. You call them. They have all of the information on how to file. This is not a simple process. There is not an online document that you can go and say, hey, I'm just going to sign. Okay? It's something you actually have to go and do it. Okay, so if they take that first step and sign the birth father registry, that helps them take one step forward into maintaining their parental rights. Okay? The next step they have to do is then they have to file paternity action. And this has to all be done prior to birth mom signing, remember, okay? So he needs to file that paternity action, give her notice of the paternity action, and maintain that right there, okay? Perfect, okay, say he's done all of that. But then, when she calls up and says, hey, you filed this paternity action, I need you to help pay for this doctor visit. And he goes, doctor visit? No way. Okay? If he doesn't pay or offer support, he can then also have his rights terminated ahead of time. Okay? So he has to do all of these things in order to maintain his rights. Okay? Yeah.
So the birth father registry, they have to file for each encounter with a different female?
Yes. Yes, they do. So, yeah, I mean, maybe you go up to fraternity row at the U and say, here, let us help you. But no, that is, yeah, because when you file that paternity, that at the registry, you need to list who the person was that that you had relationships with. So, the sad part is you actually see this too. You know, you see this married men that have gone out and had issues. They don't want to stop filing this, signing this registry. So, okay, out-of-state birth fathers. This is where, honestly, it depends. I mean, it becomes very interesting at that. Again, I'm under the thought that I like to provide them the notice. We send them a nice letter, say, you know, call us if you have any questions. Here's your options. We actually send them a relinquishment, give them the ability to relinquish, do all of these things just to put them on notice of the 30 days. The law actually states, it lists out, if you provide notice, you have to tell them everything that they need to do. Years ago, we didn't have to do that. We just said, hey, she's going to play this child for adoption. If you don't take care of what you need to do, it's going to move forward. But now you actually have to tell them, list all those steps that we just went through of what they have to do. Okay, so what I'd like to, just for a few minutes, go through some of the steps in different types of adoptions. Okay, so we're going to do private adoptions, and I'll explain kind of how, this is where you wonderful people come involved, because you do so much of this. Okay, this is some of the paperwork, some of the things that actually make the attorney's job work. You know, we get the glory because we get to stand in front of the judge and do the adoption, but honestly the work was done ahead of time by the work which you guys do. I know in our office Meredith does so many of these, and we couldn't do it without her, but Meredith, I need to bring you to the next adoption, because you don't always get that. It's always that